When it comes to choice and options of games to play, modern gaming has an endless supply of content to consume. Games that have hours and hours of things for us to go and do and keep us invested, but sometimes it isn't really that satisfying. In the last couple of weeks and multiple times throughout 2024, I've been craving something different. Not a 30 to 40 hour commitment of a game, no grinding for weapons, armor, or cosmetics, a more linear, complete experience that you can knock out in just one evening. This led me looking back to one of my favorite franchises, Halo. Being that it was the 15th anniversary a week or so ago, I started to look towards playing Halo ODST, a game that often gets forgotten because it came out between two of the best games in the series, Halo 3 and Halo Reach. There are quite a few people that love Halo ODST that talk about this game quite fondly, but I couldn't remember anything apart from a few characters and that iconic silenced SMG. I often remember the game for the marketing more than the game itself. The CGI trailer of the rain-soaked ODST moving through the streets was really cool at the time, and then we had the absolutely brutal live-action trailer, which they had a bunch of in the earlier Halo days. They did it with Halo 3. I don't know if they did it with Reach, but I definitely remember the ODST one. The fascinating thing about ODST is that it started as a DLC for Halo 3 and then turned into its own experience with a smaller team and a smaller budget, focused on telling a more intimate story that bridges the gap between Halo 2 and Halo 3, but from the perspective of the orbital drop shock troopers. What I found out during my playthrough is that this game is one of the more memorable experiences that I've had in an FPS for a while, and it inspired me to make a video talking about ODST in more depth, so that's why we are here today, and it's so much better than I remember. Many of the shooters or FPSs that came out during 2006 to 2011 seem to capture a lot about what I like in linear games. Memorable experiences, action set pieces, really fun gameplay quirks. Portal, Mirror's Edge, the Halo games, the early Call of Duty campaigns, and ODST all fall into this category. Oftentimes games in that period didn't have to spend a boatload of money to create, and it's a reflection of the current landscape of modern games, where throwing money at developers from publishers isn't necessarily going to make a good game, which has been clear for sure in the AAA games industry, and I think it's been especially apparent in first-person shooters. Bigger doesn't always mean better, and ODST is an example of this. It offers us an intimate, smaller scale story, an atmospheric gameplay design, and something different to any other game in the franchise. So allow me to talk about how it achieves this. Many of the games that we are accustomed to in the Halo franchise are made up of Chief and Cortana essentially blazing through the Covenant to help turn the tide and win the war. Master Chief, by every sense of the word, is a hero, is a god. There's a reason he's called the Demon by the Covenant, and everything that he does, most every action that he takes, is remarkable and epic. ODSTs, in comparison, are just regular humans. Yes, they have, quote-unquote, the best of the best training, but they are just regular soldiers, and you are doing that throughout the game. You are just a human in a war with the Covenant. What I love about ODST's narrative is it shifts and narrows the lens to focus on completing one mission with extraordinary odds. It's a human story. Getting out alive and completing the mission with your life is all that the troopers can hope for. It's both lower stakes in the grand scheme of the franchise, but is also a mission of vital importance to the future of the war. I won't go into every story beat, but it's quite clear to me that Bungie really tried to tell a tight, well-written story. Dialogue is meaningful and has purpose and feels incredibly locked in from the narrative team. Part of this, I think, is likely down to budgetary reasons, and not having to have endless lines of dialogue to build out certainly will help keep the costs down in terms of hiring voice actors and then writing all the extra additional lines to put into the game, etc, etc. Right from the start of the game, with the opening credits, we get a summary of the situation at the hand, what the importance of the mission is for a trooper, and what the troopers are. So if you're unfamiliar with what ODSTs are before going into this, and just how this mission will play a part in the war effort. The game doesn't need to add any extra exposition after this or fluff to the world, apart from maybe some fleeting bits of dialogue here and there. Often it lets the player be curious about things, but it also keeps things focused. And I think also Bungie could probably hazard a guess that many people that were playing this had just come off the back of Halo 3 and all of the other games in the franchise, so they probably had a good idea of what's going on. We don't need to be told what's going on repeatedly, and it doesn't do that to the player here. In more modern games, we are often smacked in the face with this. A lot of extra dialogue to help build out the world, loads of exposition of the wider narrative, and a lot of times it just goes, hey, this is important, pay attention. ODST doesn't need to do this. An example of this is just going straight into the introductions of the squad. We don't need to know each one of their extensive backstories. We get to meet Romeo, Mickey, and Dutch, a collection of replacement troopers that have just been thrown together for this squad, and it doesn't seem like a cohesive unit, but they're there to do the mission. They're snarky, they're uptight, they're jaded because they've been in the war for so long. We are then introduced to Buck and Dare. Shout out to Buck, he was also in Halo Reach and also in Halo 5. He becomes a Spartan eventually, but they have an interesting relationship in the game, but the game only alludes to everything that's gone on. It doesn't need to explicitly say, I didn't say I love you and I could have said this. There's just like little sprinklings of dialogue that make you curious, but they don't need to dive deeper into. For the majority of the game, we play as the silent protagonist, the Rookie, but the story is told through a series of flashbacks taking the form of each squad member and documenting their journey. After that initial introduction though, we're straight into the drop pods and flying down to the surface, and obviously everything goes to crap because we have a little bit of an EMP burst thanks to a Covenant carrier. We then drop, and it's 6 hours later or 6 hours after the drop where we take the form of the silent protagonist, the Rookie. The way that ODST then tells its story is you find clues or breadcrumbs of the squad members that we have, and you're kind of piecing together what they did and how they regrouped with one another through flashbacks. You start as Buck, and then you'll play as Dutch and Mickey and Romeo, and you kind of get to that point where they all meet back up together, and then eventually the Rookie is able to meet up in the later part of the game. What I love about how ODST tells the story is that it's very much like a detective game at times. After each of the missions, you cut back to the New Mombasa streets where you're playing as the Rookie. You go from these intense action sequences that you're doing in a couple of the missions back to the quiet moments in the New Mombasa streets alone. This allows the narrative time to breathe, and you get to reflect as a player on what has just happened, which we don't see often in most games sometimes. It's always, let's get to the next big story beat, so you don't really have a chance to kind of go through all of the ramifications. Sometimes you'll make choices in a lot of these games and you don't really know the consequences of them, or they're not really that impactful. Here, it allows you to do that. Because ODST is a smaller scope, the narrative doesn't need to take giant leap after giant leap. It's just one small step, one breadcrumb after another, slowly fleshing out the mystery of each of the squad members and then making you care about them a little bit more as individuals. And in many ways, I feel like this was a trial run for the narrative team with what we got in terms of Reach, trying to make us care about a group of individuals rather than just Chief and Cortana. And I found myself thinking a lot of the time, what an amazing TV show this could be if they followed the troopers around like orbital dropshot triggers, or even Marines in a Band of Brothers style show that only alluded to Chief and his doings, and they had occasional showings up of the elites and there was maybe brutes and stuff. It would be a really cool dynamic to have rather than what we got with the Halo TV show, but that's another story for another day. I think it's also important to mention that the Rookie isn't just a silent protagonist that we are playing as. They have small moments of personality, like being frustrated when messing with a broken sniper, or there's a brief moment where they pause after picking up Dare's helmet to kind of understand what is going on, because they are also trying to figure out the mystery alongside the player. I often enjoyed the Rookie sections purely because of the one thing that ODST does incredibly well, and that is atmosphere. If you've been enjoying the atmosphere of this video, make sure you leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. A lot of times when you're walking through the streets of New Mombasa, you start to get the feeling of loneliness, of isolation, and that you are alone. And all you have to do is push forward towards the map marker. We're only broken out of this loneliness by having small fights with the Covenant, finding audio logs that detail this side story with Sadie, or the hum of phantoms over our head. It's simultaneously devoid of life when you are in the city, but it has a lot of small details that I really love, like writing on the wall that says glass this, or screw the UNSC. There's turned over cars, lightning in a fiery sky, blood smatters from both the UNSC forces and the Covenant, kind of like a blood trail towards your next clue. Bungie has captured this quiet feeling so well, but not in a scary or a tense way. It's oddly relaxing, and the soundtrack certainly plays a part in this. There's almost this essence of like a noir-esque soft jazz that's playing with saxophone and piano spliced into moments as you explore, and I can imagine like a dialogue of a reporter talking to himself in his head as you're walking around. It's that type of feeling, and they definitely cooked with gas when they did this soundtrack, and it's kind of a departure to the normal orchestral sounds that are big moments that we have in the franchise. I do remember fondly a lot of the Halo soundtracks, especially during that 2007 to 2012 period, and ODST is definitely up there with one of my favorites. Can't help but think of the visual aesthetic when walking around the city. You do have the night vision that kind of outlines a lot of the different things, and you can sometimes have it on, sometimes not, and it actually is a benefit to have it on more times than not. And I feel like being at night adds this feeling as well, and I couldn't help imagine what this would feel like if it was released in more modern times with more modern graphics. The addition of rain and rain effects and incredible lighting and ray tracing, it would be absolutely gorgeous if they got it right, almost like how Cyberpunk does. And I often think that if they did that here with the visual aesthetic, it would be so incredible and would add even more to that atmosphere. What I did tend to notice this time around in the city itself is that we aren't actually as alone as you think. The game is like subtly guiding you to the next location, even if you have a marker of where you're going. Like if you pay attention to the city around you, you'll see things as keep right or detour. There'll be these blocks that come out of the ground that stop things, or there'll be green icons that are lighting the way. And all of this is the subtle way of the game's AI, Virgil, telling you where to go. Find out more about that character a little bit later on in the story, but you're not alone in the city as much as you think. They're kind of guiding you subtly of where you need to go in this semi-open world setting. The way ODST blends all of these things together to create a great atmosphere is something I'd like to see in more modern FPSs in future. It's great to have the shooty gun guy moments that you can have in so many of the FPSs that we've seen, but telling great stories, especially in the way that the story is told. A lot of times I look back to Reach and it feels like there's a camera crew following the squad. In this specific instance, you're seeing cutscenes through the first person perspective rather than it being like a third person that we see with a lot of the cutscenes in the franchise. I think this was the first time that we're really experimenting with doing this. Now, I could sit here and go through all of the amazing things that I love about ODST, but I think it's important to talk about some of its flaws, especially in terms of its gameplay. ODST isn't the most amazing Halo game. It takes a lot of the things that were good in Halo 3, but does take away some of those really cool elements. There's no dual wielding here. There's no armor abilities like we have in Reach, because essentially we aren't 7 foot tall super soldiers, but there's nothing that really makes us more special as an ODST. There's nothing that is really unique about us. It just feels like we're essentially a dumbed down Spartan. It does seem like a silly point to make, but it would have been nice to have some form of gameplay gimmick that was specific and not just the night vision or the one weapon. I know that assassinations weren't in this game, but it would have been really cool to have seen them, and I know it was a massive feature that was added in Reach, so they probably just saved it for that because that was more of a mainline game and this was kind of a smaller project. ODST doesn't do anything in terms of its shooting or its mechanics that really stand out, outside of the fact that you have no shields this time. You have a health bar that kind of works like a shield. There's like a stamina type feature, and if you get damaged enough, you'll take health damage, and you need to go and top them up as you're going around the city. But when I actually look at this feature now, it kind of looked like a testing ground for the health system that we have in Reach, which is a hybrid between shields and health. What I do think ODST does well in the rookie sections specifically is turn you into a scavenger. You will rarely find any ammo for the silent SMG or the pistol. Two of those I actually think are really good in terms of the weapon additions, but we never see them again in the franchise apart from maybe the pistol, but we don't see the silent SMG, at least from my knowledge, in any of the other games. Either way, you are not finding as much ammo for them, so you are taking from the Covenant to help you get through these areas. And I distinctly remember how rough this game was on Legendary because you had no health regen, ammo was scarce, and there was kind of this sense of desperation. So I suppose that is the main selling point of playing as an ODST. You're not just this invincible Spartan running around, just doing things on a whim. Criticizing this game is funny because I can spend a bunch of time talking about the narrative and the atmosphere and how much I love the more open, semi-open sections of the game, but they are empty. I could sit here and say that I need to have more things to do, side activities to do in these sections, but then I have to stop myself. And I do this because in the context of the game and the time that it was being released, it could be empty by design, budgetary reasons, or something unrelated. And I envisioned that if this game was to release right now, that people would want more quests and things to do, and it would end up bloating this section, and it wouldn't capture that same feeling as it does. Outside of the New Mombasa sections, though, I do think that this game is pretty much the same as any Halo game during the time period. They have their own gimmick that they are using throughout the level, whether that's the Warthog level, there's defending an area, there's a Banshee section, there's a tank section, and none of them are bad by any means. My favorite mission is the Pelican mission, where you start off as a sniper and then you move into defending a crashed Pelican, and then you are there fighting off against Banshees with all manner of explosives and fun weapons. And I think that's the main mission that stood out to me, at least, that made me feel like an ODST. Not necessarily because of the gameplay, but the desperate final stand that you're making to defend this Pelican. And I think that definitely if it had had more moments like that, I maybe would think a little bit differently about the quote-unquote ODST feel that it has. You could argue that the new Mombasa sections and the way that they do their gameplay there is more of that, but I still think that the game is pretty much a dumbed down version of Master Chief. In many ways, ODST was an experiment from Bungie. You can see the systems that have been tested here, and you can see how it was fully fleshed out in Reach especially. Arguably the best game in the franchise, so maybe this game needed to happen for that to move forward. You can see how this DLC started to turn into its own thing, and they didn't necessarily iterate too much on what was good about Halo 3, but they did just enough here to make it stand out and feel unique. It's not reaching for new incredible heights in terms of gameplay, but it certainly offers a different and unique experience. Let's also not forget that ODST introduced Firefight to the franchise, and I would say that is a universally loved mode. Pulling myself out of the game for a moment, after playing ODST, it's yet again another classic example of how the Halo franchise has been a little bit fumbled in terms of its potential and the wealth of stories that are on the table. Smaller stories, grittier stories that can be told, like this game and like in Reach, which I talk about a lot because I love that game so much, but it also offers the opportunity to experiment with different genres of gameplay. Imagine an ODST game that had XCOM style, which is different to Halo Wars, and it was like in an earlier part of the war. I've seen people suggest that an ODS team similar to Helldivers that we had would be fantastic. There's even a Hell Jumpers mode that someone's created in Halo Infinite. They could experiment outside of the FPS genre and do something different like they did with Halo Wars. But they also could do another FPS, another smaller story, like an ODST 2, for example. Or they could do one where you're surviving as a Marine during an outbreak of the flood and it becomes this like horror style game. There's a lot of potential there. I think ODST can sometimes be forgotten by most because it landed between Halo 3 and Halo Reach, the two most high profile games in the franchise. And it was actually labeled at the time a really overpriced DLC because it wasn't offering enough content. And for the price tag that it had at the time, that was understandably fair. But I do think this game gets overlooked. I know I might be singing the game's praises now, but what I've noticed about myself as I've gotten older is that going back and playing games again, such as Halo ODST or Halo Reach, gives me a different perspective to when I first played them when I was much younger. I have a newfound appreciation for these games that I love, and it allows me to also critique them better now than I did back then. I'm really glad I decided to revisit this game 15 years later because I think I appreciate it more now than I thought I would. Playing both Reach and this game this year has really reminded me why I love the Halo franchise and why, more importantly, I love single player FPS experiences. I feel like they're slowly fading away in more modern times, unfortunately, and I'd like to see some form of resurgence of them again with less risk, tighter experiences that can be really great and memorable. Just like ODST, smaller scale, smaller budget, and awesome. Hopefully one day we can see another game like this, but I don't think we will, and that's a damn shame. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section about ODST. Do you think it's underrated? Do you think it's overrated? Are there any other single player games you think I should play and cover on the channel? Let me know in the comment section. Like the video if you've enjoyed it, and subscribe as always. This has been It's Jimbo, and I'll see you guys next time.